Hey, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. It's great to see the numbers tick up here of those of you that are joining us on this Friday afternoon or Friday morning, depending on which coast you're on. And to talk about, I think, a really intriguing idea that is the subject of this book, Them Before Us. Thrilled to have my friend Katy Faust here with us. We're going to dive deep into the content that she is advocating for, and really a cause. Content is not even the right word. It is a cause that she is in many ways leading, and super excited about it. You've heard us on Breakpoint talk about the idea of children's rights over adult happiness, quoting Katy, quoting some others, Helen Alvarez, scholar at George Mason, quoting this new Promise to America's Children document that several organizations have partnered with. So we are all in on this because we realize that that this is one of the great causes of our time and our place. So really excited about that. Let me do just a couple of housekeeping things. Good to see you, Bishop Derek, entering into the chat and from Alabama. Appreciate him. Listen, if you would like to ask a question, this is going to be really interactive. I'm going to interview Katy here. She's going to walk us through the content of her book. If you want to ask any questions, you can type that in the Q&A panel. All right, so there at the bottom of your screen or whatever it is, you'll have a little Q&A. We are not going to do the raise hand thing, and that's mainly because I like to talk too much, and so does Katy. We're not going to have any time to hear any of you guys talk, so forgive us. We're not going to do that, but you may ask any question you want. Just type it into the Q&A, and that's our nefarious way of saying if you have to type it, you probably won't write that many words. So please go ahead and do that. I'm having fun. I hope we can have fun here. This is going to be a serious topic, so hopefully we're going to have fun. If you have any technical issues that you need to address, hit the chat button, and Elise, who is the magic wizard behind the scene making everything go well, will answer any questions that you have. First question, will the webinar be recorded and shared? Absolutely. We'll record this and you'll get this webinar and this recording, and you can use it to have conversations with your kids. You can share it widely. Just don't post it on social media, especially because we never know what Katy's going to say out loud, and it could get us in a lot of trouble. So never, ever do that. But you can actually use this in a group with other folks. So type your questions in the Q&A tab, type any comments into the chat box, and we want you to pick up a copy of this book. We're making the book, Them Before Us. Here it is. I was going to hold it up, but you can see it on Katy's screen too, because she has mastered the Vanna White marketing technique there behind her. Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And Elise will put in both the Q&A box and the chat box the link that you can click on to go to breakpoint.org to the giving page. And for a gift of any amount over $19, we want to send you a copy of this book. Katy Faust, one of my favorite people. I really appreciate all that you're doing. Let me read the official bio, okay, so that people know who you really are. Founder and director of Them Before Us. Them being the kids, us being the adults. She received her undergraduate degree in political science and Asian studies at St. Olaf College, then a Fulbright scholarship to Taiwan. Fluent in Mandarin, assisted her when she worked with the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. She now publishes widely on the rights of children, a regular contributor at The Federalist, and a whole lot of other things. She currently has a really fun video series called Dear Katy, which is really interesting as well. Married to a pastor, mother of 4 children. We'll tell you where to find her online in just a second, but the author of Them Before Us. Katy, good to see you. Thanks for being a part of this with us.
Okay, so I'm really honored to be with you. And before we talk about my book, let's talk about the Colson Center. I've had a chance to join Shane on Upstream, which may have been the best interview I've ever done on the book. Came out this week.
Until now, let's be clear. Until this moment. Until this
right.
one. Jeez, come
it's
on.
that is about to be erased, right? Just like all of women's track records are about to be erased. That is sorry. Okay, so yes, this is going to be a great interview. I've had a chance to do a conversation on the Strong Women podcast. I've been able to collaborate with the Colson Center on the What Would You Say videos. I want to say this about the Colson Center. They are the most reliable when it comes to the Christian worldview, both in terms of the content of their answers, but also where they're willing to go in the cultural conversation. And here's a little cheat sheet for you who have kids at home. This is the easiest way to train your kids into Christian worldview, that Christian worldview mindset. This is the easiest way to give them a Christian lens through which to view the world. this is what I've been doing ever since my kids were little. I just listen to the 5-minute podcast while I'm making breakfast, while they're sitting around the table. So even if we don't have a conversation about it, they hear it. They know that mom understands, bioethics, or that she's listening to things about bioethics. If they hear something about race at school, they know that like the Christians are also talking about that too. And so this is like, get in with the Colson Center, get on board, support them, because they are doing something that I just really feel like nobody else is doing, nobody else is offering. And especially as a parent, equipping my kids, the Colson Center has resources that honestly, they're not matched anywhere else.
Well, listen, I paid her no money for that endorsement, but I will take it and run. That means so much. Not only just because I respect you so much, Katy, but as a mom. I mean, that's really the goal, is moms who and dads who care and want their kids to think well. And that's one of the reasons I was so intrigued by this idea of how we could push back on the sexual revolution. What you just said about, look, they're hearing this stuff out in the culture. They need to know that Christians are thinking about it too. That's a huge point. Dorothy Sayers said that Christians often talk about the faith as if it only has to do with 10% of life. And who would be interested in a philosophy of life that had nothing to do with 90%?
Yeah.
Right. And such a great point. But you are in a different position where you're not only talking about something that matters culturally. This is an area where that's open white space. This is where Christians can lead. We're going to find ourselves with some strange running mates on this. We can talk more about that here as we go. But pushing back on what seems to be the unquestionable juggernaut of the sexual revolution in so many different ways. And we've boiled it down here. You guys have boiled it down here to this idea of children's rights. So I'm just going to give you a second to just unlock when you say them before us. This is a rallying call. It's a slogan. It's a vision to put out in front of us to run at. What do you mean by them before us?
Yes, thank you. So the world talks about marriage and family from an us before them perspective, us being adults and them being children. It is always about us. It is always about what adults want and adult desires and adult longings and how adults identify and what adults say that their rights are. But that is a formula for getting all of these conversations exactly wrong. And it leads to terrible personal decisions and terrible policy decisions. And so what we try to do at Them Before Us is to flip the script and say all of these questions about marriage and family really should prioritize them, children, before us, the adults, mainly because those are the kids. They don't have decision-making capacity. They don't have the volition involved in creating these different family structures or the choices that lead to it. They simply have to go along with whatever adults are choosing to do. But children actually do have a fundamental right to be known and loved by both their mother and father. And if we prioritize those rights, if we recognize those rights, they actually serve as a very effective template over which we can lay any other question about marriage and family and come up with the right answer. So, we go through a lot of different issues in the book. We go through every issue that has to do with marriage and family in the book. But the truth is, those are not all different conversations. They're all the same conversation. It's the conversation of, are we honoring children's rights to their mother and father, or are we disregarding those rights? So we examine all of these different forms of modern family, which let the reader understand, simply means child loss. When you hear the word modern family, it just means a kid had to lose something to be in that family.
That's such a profound statement. And when you talk about all the different issues having an underlying kind of common thing, I've often phrased it, this way, and you can just start at no fault divorce, and you can go to, ubiquitous pornography over the internet, unregulated, or to sex education starting as young as kindergarten, or, hormone blockers, and only one side of the counseling that's even accessible to so many people now in the United States, as well as around the world.
Yeah.
And that is like, we make these decisions. We don't really, we're kind of trying something new, right? Like we're trying something new, separating sex from marriage, or trying new reproductive technologies that don't require a mom and a dad to be in the picture, to be known. And then we say something like, oh, the kids, they'll be fine. The kids are fine. The kids aren't fine.
Yeah, that's right. So, I give me this all day long. Let's do this for hours. Okay. I'm not kidding. This is what all the conversation should be, in my opinion. And I really want to, if it's okay with you, I really want to do lots of good, hard questions from your listeners.
Okay.
Like, that's my jam. Like, I am not so much a presenter. I want all the hard questions. So let me go through the content of the book, if that's okay with you, kind of give an overview of everything it is so that people have an idea about what are the kind of things that they can ask about. Um, is that okay? Can I just do that
Yeah,
real quick?
absolutely. Just walk us through the
Yeah.
content, and then also go ahead and type in questions. You should be able to click on the Q&A box, type in any question. We've got one already sitting here that came in through text, but go ahead, send this through. So
Yeah.
yeah, walk us through it, and then we'll just take these questions.
Yeah. So we began with a foreword by Robert P. George of Princeton, who, we just thought the guy could really use a leg up in his career.
Yeah, he's
I
kind of
mean,
underachieved, hasn't he? I mean, he's just
really,
the
yeah,
McCormick prophet. No, really the brightest Catholic mind of our generation. Yeah.
right. Yeah. I mean, I think that when I got the email last spring saying that he could write the forward, that night he was having dinner with Justice Clarence Thomas, right? But anyway, we hope that this preface opens doors for him that previously have been closed. The bottom line is his preface alone, his forward alone is worth the price of the book, is worth donating to the Colson Center just so that you can read his preface. It's awesome. We go through kind of the story of how we got here in the introduction, and we talk about why there's co-authors to this, and that is because I am not an awesome writer, and how wonderful to have a divine partnership with another friend who can help me, articulate a lot of these ideas. And then we begin chapter 1 on children have rights. And this is something that I think most people on the right are familiar with when it comes to the abortion issue. We accept that children have a right to life. What's unknown to a lot of people is that children actually have rights on this side of the womb as well. So we talk through why children have a fundamental natural right to their own mother and father, and why we think that should be recognized as a legal right. Then we talk about why Democrats should care about children's rights, namely that you don't tick off any of the items on your social justice wish list unless you can secure children's rights to both their mother and father, because every major social issue that they are battling, from child poverty to child homelessness to falling academic rates to teen pregnancy and teen suicide, all of those demographics are overpopulated with children who have lost their father. And then we talk about why Republicans should care about children's rights and how you don't get any of the things that you want: small government, personal responsibility, low taxes, unless you have big marriage and big family, right? You simply cannot get what you want unless you are strengthening children's rights to their mother and father. Then chapter 2 is somewhat challenging for a lot of us, and it is why biology matters in parenting. And we go through the research on why biological parents are distinctly connected to, protective of, and invested in their children. And this is hard because a lot of us know heroic step parents who are filling in for negligent biological parents. And we can acknowledge the reality of those exceptions. But then also, we must acknowledge the rule that biological parents simply offer something to their children statistically in terms of like safety, security, and investment that non-biologically related adults do not tend to provide. And they also offer something that children crave, which is biological identity, right? Even kids who are raised by loving heterosexual adults, like adoptive parents, like my husband and I hope are providing to our adoptive son, and even children who are created through sperm and egg donation who are being raised by a mom and dad, those kids crave the biological identity that can only be found in the two people responsible for their existence. And that's why we have waves and waves of adoptees and donor conceived kids who are scouring the internet trying to find their missing parents. Number 3 won't be too much of a surprise for your audience. It's on why gender matters in parenting and the distinct ways that mothers and fathers interact and benefit their children. Number 4, I think, is really helpful, and it's why marriage matters. We talk extensively about why marriage is a social justice issue for children and how redefining marriage has redefined parenthood. We've talked about the other changes to parenthood laws that have resulted from reproductive technologies and the redefinition of marriage. We are transforming the entire legal basis of parenthood away from biology and adoption towards intent. Like, I intend to parent this child, therefore I should be able to take it home from the hospital, which truly is the most terrifying aspect of this conversation, because really you're just talking about buying and selling babies at that point. If biology and adoption are not the basis for parenthood, um, really children are just commodities to be awarded to whatever adult has the money and means to acquire them. Then we talk about divorce. This is not something that gets the attention that it deserves on the right. Um, we do tend to give disproportionate attention to same-sex parenting or surrogacy. But the reality is that when it comes to the numbers, divorce is one of the largest ways that children's right to their mother and father are being threatened. And kids don't just get over it. The research is damning when it comes to the impact that divorce has on children, from their mental health and emotional health to their physical health, that divorced children of divorce are more likely to have cancer and heart disease, from their ability to form their own relationships when they grow up. So divorce, we make a distinction. We talk about how there's a difference between at-fault divorce. Sometimes if one of the parents are at fault, it may bring relief to the child if a divorce takes place. But the majority of divorces these days are no-fault divorces, where the adults simply refuse to do the hard work and thus hand the burden off to their children to do the hard work. Then we talk about same-sex parenting in chapter 6, where we debunk, we like extensively go through the research that says that children with same-sex parents fare no different than children raised in heterosexual homes. I know that you and Shane have addressed this at length also in some of the Breakpoint Q&A, which is awesome, because this really is a very common objection when you're having conversations about same-sex parents. Yeah, like, oh, no study has found that kids like don't fare as well, right? Because no good study has been done on the topic, not until after Obergefell anyway, except Regnerus, but even he would admit the limitations of his research. And then we just give you about 30 stories of kids who were raised by same-sex couples who talk about their desperate, almost obsessive longing for the missing maternal or paternal love that they were made for. Chapter 7, we talk about sperm and egg donation, and the deep, very distinct struggles that these kids experience. Feelings of commodification, like, I am uncomfortable. It feels like I was bought and sold because I was literally chosen out of a catalog. The reality that they suffer from the genealogical bewilderment of wondering, why do I look this way? Where did I get these features? Fantasizing about their missing parent, even if they were created through sperm donation, but raised by a loving father. A lot of times these kids fall asleep at night fantasizing about that missing biological connection. Who is my mother? Does she know that I exist? Will I ever find her? Have I already walked past her on the street and not even known about it? I mean, these are really common questions that kids ask. Then we talk about surrogacy. This is hard for people in the pro-life community because we love babies. And isn't surrogacy just about babies and people getting babies that can't have them? And the unfortunate answer is no. Surrogacy is not about babies. Surrogacy is about on-demand designer babies shipped worldwide. And that it's really never a child-friendly process. What surrogacy does really is it separates one mother into 3 different women: the genetic mother, the egg donor, the birth mother who gestates the child, and then the social mother who raises the child. And surrogacy really says, which of these 3 mothers do you want? Which one do you not need? Just tell us, write the check, we'll give you the one, and then go home with the kid, right? So surrogacy is never a child-friendly process. It always requires kids to sacrifice so that adults, whether they're heterosexual, homosexual, single, or married, can have what they want. In chapter 9, we talk about adoption. Adoption, we draw a very firm distinction between adoption and reproductive technologies. Adoption, when it is properly understood, is an institution that serves the needs of children. Reproductive technologies are a marketplace that serve the desires of adults. We spend a lot of time talking about things that adoptive parents like me had to go through before we had a child placed with us: screenings, background checks, references, home studies, evaluations, interviewing our other children, post-placement supervision training, because social workers are not fools. They understand that placing a child with an unrelated adult statistically is risky for the kid, That's why we've developed decades of best practice around adoption,
Hmm.
saying adults like me who want a kid, intent is not enough, right? I need to be evaluated. No such evaluation exists for people who create children through reproductive technologies, even though a vast majority of these cases involve a child going home with one or two unrelated adults. So that's really helpful for a lot of people on our side. If you do get the book, you may want to skip directly to chapter 9, because what about adoption is
Mhm.
one of the biggest questions that we get. And then finally, in chapter 10, we spend a lot of time talking about what this global children's rights movement, why does it need to be global? Because these threats to children are international. Um, you know, who are the people that are supporting you? Pretty much ordinary Americans, because politicians, celebrities, and academia honestly don't have the stones to do it. Like, really, the only people that have the courage for this kind of work is ordinary Americans. And then also, like, how things need to change, what things need to change for us personally, and then how our view of these questions need to change when it comes to policy. So that's kind of the them before us in a nutshell. Um, and really what we've tried to do is distill all of these questions about marriage and family through this one simple question of what about the kids, so that you can go confidently into all of these different conversations, because honestly, it is time for children to have a robust defense in the matters of marriage and family.
So that was one of the things that I thought was so helpful about the book is we often play cultural whack-a-mole on these
Mhm.
issues. Like this issue pops up and we smack it down, and this issue pops up and we're like, it's not a big deal. So, that sort of thing. So putting it all together around a common ethical framework is one of the things that's most helpful. But then also there is something you can do. That's what's huge
Yeah.
about this book, is you push it towards action, which is a very Chuck Colson-ish thing to do. You made a mistake in which you said, please ask questions, because
Oh,
they did. And there's a ton of them. And I'm just going to, there's a bunch we can put together. I want to start with this question because it is one that I have, as well as Bob and one other person later on in the chat. Um, Having worked in the homeschool community for a while, there's been a lot of concern about the so-called UN children's rights issue, which, of course, 10 years ago, when you heard the phrase children's rights, it was the children's rights not to be spanked, children's rights to be emancipated from their parents. There's a good bit of concern that many of us have, where children without parental permission can just go straight to a professional and take puberty blocking drugs, or even have, surgery. And I hate this surgery. It's not surgery. Basically have a mutilation procedure take place. So you put all that together, and that even that phrase children's rights creates some questions. And there's a couple questions related to that. And it's a great question.
yes. Only the Colson Center audience would know to ask that question. It's a very good question. So we spend in chapter 1 making the case for why children's rights to their mother and father is a right. We examined the philosophical underpinnings of that, because you can do it without the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is exactly what they're referring to. The UNCRC is the most widely ratified treaty in human history. Every nation in the world has signed it, except the United States, because of this misunderstanding. Well, actually, the UNCRC does have some problems. It lists some legitimate rights and then throws in a bunch of other things that
Right.
are pseudo rights or commodities on top of it. So there's some confusion there. What is helpful about that is when you're talking about non-US conversations, most countries have some language to use for children's rights in the family, and that's where this is helpful. I actually just, after listening to a bunch of Colson Center podcasts over the weekend, I reached out to Emily Gao on
Mhm.
the Promise to American Children, which I was like, hallelujah, thank you. I love that it's child centric. And I said, hey, listen, I totally know what you're doing here in terms of like protecting children's primary relationships. I know that you're looking at parental rights to raise their child according to their consciences, direct their upbringing, make medical decisions for them. Children's rights to their own mother and father are really just the other side of the same coin, right? Children have a right, adults have a right to take home their child from the hospital. Children also have a right to go home with their parents. And so I made the case to her that children's rights, that language should not be avoided. It just needs to be redeemed,
Mhm.
right? That language has been so misused. In fact, it's been misused by people on the left who do the exact same thing with adult desires. Anything that they think that they really, really want, they will conveniently frame as a right, right? I have a right to parenthood. I have a right to marriage. I have a right to self identify. Whatever it is, I have a right to choose. So that's not the case. There actually are natural rights. We spend a little bit of time as lay people, my co-author Stacy and I, talking about how do you know a right from a commodity.
Mm.
And so we kind of have a 3 rules that make it a right test. Like, it existed pre-government, everybody gets it in the same amount, and nobody has to provide it for you. So a child's right to life certainly meets those criteria. A child's right to their own parents also meets those criteria.
Read those three things off. I have not heard that before until your book. That's a really important distinction to make.
Well, and this is what you get when you get non-philosophers wrestling through this issue. The good news, the good news is we have really smart people that agree with us, like
Right.
Melissa Michella, who is, in my opinion, kind of the philosophical giant on the conversation of children and parental rights. So we cite her in the book. But for the sake of the non-philosophers out there, you know, a lot of the times the world calls commodities rights. I have a right to government funded birth control. I have a right to housing. I have a right to education. And so we're like, nope, there's 3 things that you can decide, that you can use to determine whether or not it's right. So the first one is, did it exist before government?
Mm.
Um, if it preceded government, then there's a good chance it's a right. And then the government's job is to protect it, not provide it. Right. So if you're talking about, like, whether you're an evolutionist on, like, looking at origins of Homo sapiens, or whether you're on team Adam and Eve, like, a child's connection to their parents existed way before government did.
Mhm.
So the second one is that everybody has it in the same amount, right? If there's a TRICARE option or a Medicare option, it's not a right. If there's varying degrees, if it's a shack versus Mar-a-Lago, it's not a right. It's a commodity, right? But if everybody automatically gets the same amount, like life, we all get one. Well, that's a pretty good indication that it's a right. Same thing with the child's connection to both of their parents. We all have the exact same amount, whether we're created the old fashioned way or whether we're created in a laboratory. Um, Everybody has the same distribution of parents, and that's exactly 2. And then third, we talk about, if somebody has to provide it for you, it's probably not a right. Even, we use the example in the book, if you have to drill it up, bottle it, package it, ship it off, it's not a right. You might need it to live, like water or housing or healthcare. You might need those things. You do need those things, but they're not a right. A right is something that nobody has to provide for you. And if a child exists, so do their parents. Nobody has to provide the parents. If the child's in existence, their parents are also in existence. So that's kind of the cheat sheet version for non-philosophers on how to distinguish what is and is not a natural right.
Well, that's a helpful approach to answering another question here, which I also, a political conservative, by and large, would struggle with. And I get this question as well, which is, okay, well, you're saying that this stuff needs to stop, and that we need to, change our emphasis over here, and we need to end this and highlight that and all that. That necessarily brings in government. And some of us have an allergic reaction anytime, with that G word, anytime it's mentioned, for good reason. But that seems to be helpful, because government does have a role. We don't want government to create rights. We don't think
Yeah.
government can, but the government does have a legitimate God-given place to secure
Protect.
those rights. Is that how you'd at least start approaching that question?
Sure, absolutely. And this is a pretty common objection too, where I say, okay, look, there's serious harms to divorce. Well, look, kids with single moms, they really long for their missing father. And everyone goes, oh, okay, so you're going to ban divorce. You're going to make single motherhood illegal. No, actually not. You can permit adults to form consensual adult relationships and make decisions that I think are less than ideal. But if you're going to promote a relationship, and it better be the relationship where the kid doesn't have to lose anything to be in that family. And that is honestly why marriage is so special, and honestly why adoption deserves special consideration, right? Because both of these are redemptive, whole responses to tragedy that are seeking to mend a wound, in the example of adoption. And so you can permit people to make terrible decisions. You can permit thruples. You can permit divorce. You know, I think that the government has roles to play in terms of stemming or discouraging those things, but it doesn't mean you ban and make things illegal. Rather, the government has a role in promoting the household, the family structure that best serves the needs of children. And that's the home of their married mother and father.
And not equating things that aren't marriage. I mean, that was my argument on same-sex marriage is it's not marriage. I mean, marriage has a definition, right? You just
Mhm.
can't make up that definition. Hey, for the record, did you just do a talk to the hand sort of thing back there? I think I saw the,
Very possibly because I'm alone here. I'm
is
alone,
that talk to the
right?
hand?
So, I mean, I got to talk to somebody.
I thought I saw it. It was good.
Yeah.
All right, all right, great question here. We talk about these, innovations, relational innovations that we call families, and of course, we realize that some of the uh, some of the motivation behind things like no fault divorce in particular, and having children outside of marriage or before marriage, and some of the other adults' rights things come from growing up in traditional homes that did not go well, abusive, dysfunctional, physically and emotionally. Can you just address that concern?
Yes. We talk in the biology matter chapters about we look at the different household structures and which ones are more likely to produce abuse and neglect. And I don't know if it like would work to help you see the chart, but you will see in the married mother father home that there are really small amounts of abuse and neglect that can take place. It's not to say that being raised by your biological parent is foolproof and guaranteed to set
Right.
you up for a trouble-free life. The reality is that it doesn't get better with any other household structure. Every other household structure, whether it's single mother, remarried, step family, raised by neither parent, like adoptive parents, or raised by a cohabiting unrelated boyfriend, for example, the rates of abuse and neglect skyrocket. So I think I say somewhere in the book that if you are a biological parent who fails to put them before us, I don't want to meet you in a dark alley while I'm holding a club. You are one of the chief offenders of failing to put them before us, right? Biological deadbeat parents or abusive parents, they epically fail. They epically fail their children. The reality is they are the vast exception. The reality, the norm is that children raised in the married mother father home are statistically
Hmm.
greatly advantaged. In fact, I just tweeted an article this morning about immigrant families and how immigrant families who are disproportionately brown have higher rates of intact marriages than most Americans do. So if you want to talk about privilege, that's privilege. That's
Right.
what's going to set you up for a thriving life. Yes, it's possible to have a negligent, emotionally distant, or abusive biological parent, but statistically, a child's biological mother and father are going to be the most connected to, protective of, and invested in them.
Yeah. Well, and that was the early argument of early version of the kids will be fine myth was kids need happy parents, not married parents. And that turned out to be just flat out wrong. But
Yeah,
we said it like we said, the kids don't need a mom and a dad. They just need loving parents, or the kids, we say these things as if we have any clue what we're talking about. And then the data
and
comes in and we're completely wrong about it.
I tell people, I totally agree. Kids need to be safe and loved. But if you really believe that kids need to be safe and loved, you're a part of my children's rights movement. Because the way that you make sure that kids are safe and loved is the default position that they should be raised by their married mother and father whenever possible.
All right, next question. Lawmakers who want to remove mother and father from birth certificates and replace it with parent one and two. I'm a little afraid to just let you go on that one because you just talked about a club in a dark alley. But I'm
Oh,
just
yeah.
gonna.
There's
I kind of
obviously
feel like
areas of my
I'm
life.
inciting violence, and I don't want to do that. But I'll let you answer it.
As my husband would tell you, on matters of injustice towards children, he's like, Katie, I really feel like there's still some sanctification that needs to take place in your life. And that is very true. So birth certificates don't exist for adults, right? Birth certificates are not instruments for adults to
Hmm.
express their intent or their desire or their wish for reality. Birth certificates serve children. We just submitted an amicus brief to the Supreme Court on a case that almost went before them called Box versus Henderson, where this is the case that's being made, and this has been marching its way through different states where a woman will say, look, if a woman can list her husband as the other parent on a birth certificate, then a woman should be able to list her wife as the parent on a birth certificate. Now, that's something called the presumption of paternity. where you presume that the husband of the woman is the father of the child. And that's correct in like 99.9% of the cases, right? If you want to take that presumption of paternity and make it a presumption of parenthood related to same-sex spouses, so this over here, presumption of paternity, unites a child's mother and father, unites their two parents in almost 100% of the cases. When you want to apply that same standard to same-sex couples, you will alienate one of the child's parents in 100% of the cases. So birth certificates, these birth certificate battles actually illustrate how completely unequal these two pairings are when it comes to children. And so we talk about that in the final chapter of our book, that you're actually going to change the way you think about birth certificates when you're able to prioritize a child's right to their mother and father in all of these conversations. Because, what we've done with marriage is what used to be the most child-friendly institution the world has ever known, because it unites the two people to whom children have a natural right, has now just been transformed into one of the many vehicles of adult fulfillment. Now they're trying to do that with birth certificates as well, right? They're saying this piece of paper doesn't exist for the child. It exists for me, the adults. I want this piece of paper to serve me and my desires. The thing that was in the headlines just last week was this male throuple who is talking about their incredible success at finally having all three of these men listed on their child's birth certificate. And oh, what a legal struggle they had to go through before the courts to make their case, because this was so important to them. No, you have just done an injustice against a child. The child actually cares who their mother is. They deserve to have that information listed on their primary document. That is a document that should serve children and recognize their rights. But once again, we're taking birth certificates and just transforming it into one more vehicle of adult intent.
Wow. What you just did was an example of why people need this book. The next question has to do with the biblical basis for saying children before parents. And I'll let you get to that in just a second. But one of the things you did is you wrote this book so that it was both accessible, readable, understandable, debatable, whether you ground your beliefs in scripture or Christianity, or you're not a person of faith at all. Now, as we would say over and over and over, if you ground it in scripture, you're grounding it in reality, because scripture describes reality. But the point here is that you don't have to be a Christian to embrace these ideas. You don't have to be a Christian to make these arguments. This is a really important, powerful point. And because these are the sorts of questions that come up over conversations. These are the sort of answers your kids need to have when they go to school or when they talk to their friends. The kind that is just like, well, we're Christians, so we believe this, is not an answer, right? That's an excuse. And
yeah, we do have I devote probably a few too many pages in the last chapter, just quotes from our supporters and like why they support children's rights. And we've got quotes from Hindus and Muslims and atheists and LDS and Catholics and evangelicals and nuns and gay men. And I mean, like, this is when you can look at this from a natural law perspective, especially when you lead with story, which we've incorporated, 100 and close to 150 different stories of kids in here, so that all of these different people, it's exactly what you said. If your worldview is grounded in reality, this kind of argumentation is going to align with your worldview, right? And so it's not something that's exclusive to Christians. We actually have two very humbling endorsements from Muslim leaders in the beginning of the book as well. Because if your worldview is grounded in reality, you're going to find some traction in this children's rights line of reasoning.
Okay, so that said, and as much as I love that, what Chuck Colson would call prudential language, the language that you can use prudently across the board, is there a biblical basis for saying children before parents?
Let me check. Yep, all of Scripture.
You're going to have to be specific. He's not going to let you off the hook. It's a good question.
Yeah. So I would say, where in Scripture is there ever the mandate for the weak to sacrifice for the strong? Because that's really what you're talking about. It's always the strong that are sacrificing for the weak. We talk, I don't talk about this in the book, but I write about, Christianity and how this intersects with marriage and family in other places. And first of all, I think back to Malachi chapter 2. We always talk about the God hates divorce in Malachi, but really, he says, why did I bring the two together? Why did I unite man and woman as one flesh? Because I was seeking godly offspring, right?
Mm.
God identifies himself that
Wow.
one of the reasons why he makes man and woman come together is because he doesn't just want offspring, he wants godly offspring. And
Mhm.
and men and women do that together. Just I guess it was 2 days ago that I published an article about Bethany Christian Services that has now decided to serve LGBTQ adults after fending off several government challenges to force them to serve LGBT couples. And I say, look, like, especially for the agencies that are seeking to follow or proclaiming to follow Jesus, Jesus gave us a very gendered definition of marriage and family, not just man will be united to his wife, but man leaves his mother and father to
Mm.
be united to his
Yeah,
wife,
that's good.
right? Gendered family of origin, gendered family of your own creation as well. Just the other day in our small group, we were reading about, like, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble,
Yeah, I mean, that would be
there's some pretty
enough.
graphic, there's some
No,
graphic,
that's right. I mean,
you know,
yeah, I mean, it was less graphic than with a baseball bat behind a shed, but it's still pretty graphic. No,
I
a
mean, like
millstone
putting
around a neck and drowning in a
putting
sea is pretty
somebody's cement, you're putting it, really, it's like putting their feet in cement, throwing them, into
fair
the
enough.
river. I mean, that's really what, is that worse than a baseball bat? That's pretty subjective.
Yeah, Jennifer just writes, God forbids child sacrifice. I think all of this is a great line because we are sacrificing children for adult desires that have to do with sexuality or some sort of spiritual impulse, misdirected. And that's paganism that the Bible condemns. The multi-generational looking at the future, that
Yeah.
this is all the way through the Old Testament. But the other thing that came to mind, not to mention the moral teaching about each of these specific behaviors, like marriage, like
Yep.
sexuality, is very clear in Scripture. But I also was thinking too of when Jesus is saying, you know, um, look, if your dad asks you, if you ask your dad for a fish, would he give you, a scorpion? If you ask
Yep.
him for, in other words, there's this model of a good father that comes out through Jesus' teaching, particularly at the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where you have this language where, no, what the dad's going to do is make you happy. He's going to bless you. I'm not make you happy in that kind of goofy sense we mean today, but that, you're a parent. I'm a parent. We want to see our
Yeah.
kids flourish. And I got up at 6 something this morning and went out in the cold and plowed snow so my kids could go to school. That was putting them before me. They didn't
Yeah.
think that because they didn't want to go to school, but too bad.
Yeah.
That's just the
Well, and
impulse, right?
what we say all through the book is the solution to all of these questions and all of these problems is simple. It's hard, but it's
Yeah,
simple.
yeah, that's
And
good.
it is, adults need to do hard things. And all of these questions, at some point, every adult, gay, married, single, straight, whatever, we are all going to have to figure out, am I going to put them, the children, before me, the adult? Certainly, you could just do that every day in family where your kid, like, has a bad day, blows up at you, and you don't blow up in return, right? You keep yourself measured and calm and reasoned because you're the adult. You don't get to act like the kid. But in all of these family structure issues, we also have the challenge of putting them before us, right? When you are 35 and still single, and you've desperately wanted a godly man to come into your life, but he has not showed up yet, you put them before us by saying, I'm not going to pursue motherhood at all cost if the cost is my child,
Mm.
does not have a father through sperm donation. If you're an adult who experiences same-sex attraction, and you would be an incredible mother or an incredible father, you don't put us before them and say a child needs to conform to my romantic desires. You put them before us and say, if I form a family, it will be a family that respects my child's right to have a daily connection with their mother and father, right? I will conform my romantic desires to that child's rights rather than the other way around. If you're in a struggling marriage right now, which, let me just say, my husband is a pastor, we do plenty of marriage counseling. So I'm never, ever going to diminish the enormity of marital struggles, right? Whether it's dealing with addiction within marriage or financial struggles or the baggage from childhood, the things that we wrestle with as married couples is hard and real, but we have to put them before us because a lot of times what adults will say is, oh, this cross is so heavy for me. Here, kids, you take it instead. So as
Wow.
a married couple, right, you have to say, I'm going to do the hard thing so that my kids don't have to. So all adults are going to have to prioritize children's rights before their own desire at some point in their life. And it begins with us, right?
Yeah, it does. There was another question about and I just want to hit it quickly about the, children's rights being confused with the UN. If you missed that, we answered that at the very beginning. So you'll get the recording. You can go back and listen to that. But, as somebody who puts them before us, there are times where if I just gave my 3-year-old what he wanted, it'd be easier on me, but it'd be bad for him.
Yeah.
And so I say no to what he wants. And that's also a way to navigate this. Children's rights today means not to be spanked, not to be, you know, held back from their sexual desires or
Yeah.
whatever else. The book is Them Before Us, and the author's Katy Faust, my guest here. Go to breakpoint.org/March 2021, breakpoint.org/March 2021, and you can get a copy for a gift of any amount over $19 and get a copy of this book. And you're hearing why it's so very, very important. Oh man, there's so many questions. I'm going to throw you
Good.
in this one. This will be good. So it's an anonymous one. You should at least put your name on this question, person, whoever you are. How have the American Protestant Christian attitudes toward birth control contributed to this problem or this situation?
Mm.
Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. I work with a lot of Catholics. So unfortunately, you're not getting me completely unawares because the Catholics has done a really good job, I think, of illustrating the harms in terms of thinking that children deserve, adults deserve children or don't deserve children, simply based on the role of and availability of birth control. Now, I don't think that there's a biblical prohibition against birth control, but I do think that it's a matter of wisdom, especially obviously avoiding abortifacients. I think that there's major problems with hormonal birth control and the impact. I mean, hey, if women can recognize that hormonal birth control wrecks their system and their emotions and their bodies and their skin, God pity the kids who are on 100 times that dose of cross-sex hormones
Oh, wow.
in cases of transgenderism, because that's really what it is, right? Hormonal birth control plays with a woman's mind and body in some pretty significant ways. So that should tip us off to the harms that kids who are transgender are going to be experiencing with that. But yes, right. The idea is that birth control kind of cut the connection between sex and diapers, as somebody smarter than me has said. And so that's actually not true, right? Sex is fundamentally a baby making activity. If you are having sex, you are consenting to parenthood. And we need to communicate that, yes, to married couples, but mainly to kids, right? To our kids, is that there is no way to tell your body not to make a baby if you're having sex, even if you're using birth control. The widespread availability of birth control has not done a whole lot to reduce fatherless children. It's up about 400% since the birth control was introduced. So, yeah, I mean, birth control is a part of this conversation.
Yeah. I often think of that meme that said, where the skeptic is like, well, if women can't have an abortion, then men should be forced to, there should be something to force men to parent. You're like,
Yeah,
congratulations, you just invented marriage.
yeah,
Um, it's
yeah.
a great one.
Guys should not be able to back out of
Right.
parenting, and we're like, right, like women are connected to their babies by a literal cord, right? We are literally connected to our babies by a cord. But men are equally important to children.
Hmm.
So cultures throughout society have developed a legal cord, a cultural cord, a social cord
Hmm.
to connect the fathers to the children. And we've called that marriage up until about like 5 minutes ago of history.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I years ago interviewed a guy named Scott Rayburn who wrote a book, secular humanist evolutionist,
Mm.
and a science writer, and he wrote a book called "Do Fathers Matter?" And and I asked him why he wrote it, and he said, "Well, there'd been all this research because the assumption was dads don't matter, only moms really matter." And so all the research was about that. And then, but people started, there was just this assumption that dads just provide, genetics and money, and that's all that the only role they play. But the research has demonstrated in profound ways. In fact, so I said, so you wanted to find out if dads matter. And I said, but really, why you? And he goes, well, honestly, I got 5 kids. I wanted to know how important I was. I said, well, do you
Mm,
matter? And the evidence is unbelievable. And it hits to the point you made that I want you to hit just quickly. I just finished recording a Breakpoint commentary that'll air on Monday that addresses your book and addresses some of these things, and talking about this sense that men and women are interchangeable, right? That's part of the sexual revolution, and that has taken the form of kind of bizarre covers of Time magazine about
yeah.
pregnant men and women who don't menstruate, and or not all women menstruate, or whatever that thing is. And if you haven't seen, by the way, in our What Would You Say video series, Joseph Backholm went to the Women's March in DC and asked what makes a
Yes.
women. And the confusion is just palpable. And there's no embarrassment. There was no setup. It was just like, and you have to see that. We'll link to that and send it out as well.
Mm-hmm.
But can you just speak to that? Because that hits the throuple idea of these 3 men, or even let's say you have a 2 women and a man. It hits all of those issues of the importance that men and women just aren't interchangeable.
Yeah. So gender is a social construct if you live in ideology land. Okay. As long as ideology is your only guide, you can completely believe that gender is a social construct. Men and women are totally interchangeable. Any interaction with reality, on the other hand, is going to refute that claim. And we spend a lot of time just in chapter 2 or chapter 3, where we talk about gender matters, going through the mountains of studies on the distinctiveness between men and women. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating is that the places where gender differences emerge the most, where women are the most typically female and men are the most typically male, are the most egalitarian societies. The societies that give women the most educational and career choices, the one where women really can do anything. They can be engineers, they can be CEOs. Those are the places where women disproportionately choose to stay home and be moms. And so this idea that it's some kind of patriarchal boogeyman that is forcing women into these rigid gender roles is just not true, because the place where women are the most free, they tend to be the most typically female, even their body types, which just really blew me away. Now, male and female are different, and I don't necessarily think that those differences are critical in every single institution, right? I don't necessarily need I'm like, give me President Nikki Haley, right? I don't need a woman, or I can have an all female cabinet as far as I'm concerned, right? But there is one place where gender distinctions matter critically, and that is in the home. That is the theater where people know and learn to become humans. It's so critical to have both halves of humanity represented, and that we've seen that it maximizes child development because moms and dads are so different. They interact so differently with their kids, and kids benefit so greatly from those differences. And it amazes me that we want to pretend like gender doesn't matter in one situation, but then in other cases we say, well, it's critical. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, we need to replace her with another woman because women have this distinct voice to, at the Supreme Court, or California mandating that there be a certain percentage of women on their boards of
Right. Yeah.
publicly held companies, right? And yet the left has relentlessly sought to destroy the one institution that gets the gender balance exactly right every time, and that's the family, the place where gender matters the most.
Yeah. Well, listen, we are just running close to the end of our time here. Again, you can go to breakpoint.org slash March 2021. And that link is in the chat box. We'll also put it in the Q&A box, and you'll get it in the email. And you are more than welcome to share this. I'm just going to hit a couple quick ones. Bruce asked, is the government to establish oughts from natural law? Yes, that's what the government does, like murder laws and theft laws and that sort of stuff. So the question is not should it, the question is to what extent, but that's a different topic than this one, although related. So I just wanted to hit that really quick. I want to, Bishop Derek has asked the question, and this is a great one too, I think to wrap up with. What legislative efforts do you know of that are in place that we can support? And this could go with a couple other questions. How do we support them? What's the best way to have our voice heard on that? And he says did he hear you speak on the House VAT issue last week? Was that you? Was that somebody else? Not you. Okay. But anyway, what are the legislative efforts that you know that are out there that are both good and bad?
So obviously, the one of the biggest that we really missed the boat on was the definition of marriage. We did not have our sleeves rolled up to the degree. We did not have the arguments and the stories in place. We were not able to effectively make the case for marriage. And so, unfortunately, we are now experiencing the fallout from that. And so, various states are scrubbing the words mother and father from their parenthood laws because, funny, when you redefine marriage, you redefine parenthood because turns out marriage actually is pretty strongly connected to parenthood. And we see that in the ways that parenthood is being undermined. The intent-based parenthood that we go into detail about in chapter 4 is also something that you should be watching for in various states, replacing or supplementing the biological and the adoptive definition of parenthood with intent-based parenthood. Lots of commercial surrogacy bills that are being pushed here and there. That's a really important one to get involved with because surrogacy is very dangerous for kids. We spend an entire chapter talking about it. Only 7% of children created in laboratories are going to be born alive. That's always a big part of surrogacy. And so IVF in general, but surrogacy specifically, is not a child-friendly process. So just keep your eyes out for what's happening. Follow your local family policy institute because mine does a pretty good job of updating me about what's going on. And there's going to be plenty of threats of children's rights coming in the future.
Let's see. I think we can squeeze. Let me see. Wow, there's so many good ones. One more. Other than read the book, there's a question what you can do. I want to point people to the, to the children's, the Promise to America's Children document is a good start. In your book, that's the last chapter. Like, here's what you can do. Join this movement. What does it look like? Let me end with this because this last question has to do with a specific question to a pastor who gave apparently just a heretical, terrible answer. And there is at some level this idea, okay, this is what's happening in the culture. Is the church doing a good job advocating for children's rights? And I don't just mean like talking and feeding hungry kids as much as that is important, and doing the wonderful work of adoption and pro-life pregnancy centers, which are doing amazing sorts of things. But give the church a grade.
It depends on the church. You've got entire denominations that deserve a 100% F, like below an F. So here's the thing. We have somehow come to the backwards conclusion that God is a homophobe or a bigot for insisting that all sexual activity be channeled into heterosexual marriage. But the reality is, outside of a national revival, that commandment alone could save our nation. And so the church should never apologize or be embarrassed for that. The church rather should talk about the truth, the beauty, and the goodness of God's design for sex and marriage. Yes, be the most sacrificial, understanding, and accommodating and loving to our gay family and friends, but never bow and scrape or apologize for God's design for sex and marriage. I wonder what that female pastor who has married the two lesbians in a church sanctioned ceremony is going to say to the sperm donor kid who comes up to them and says, I see here in the Bible that the first command with a promise is to honor my father and mother. But you officiated a marriage that deemed that my father was completely unnecessary to my life. What is that female pastor or pastor going to say to that kid? Is she going to say, sorry, but your need and right for a father was the acceptable sacrifice on this new altar that we have constructed of adult desires? Is that what she's going to say? Because to me, that's really the only option. When we compromise on God's design for sex and marriage, what we're really doing is we're forcing kids to pay the price. And when it happens in the church, we're doing it in the name of God. So good luck with that.
We have been talking with Katy Faust, and we are out of time. The book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. Come to breakpoint.org/March 2021. We'll send you a copy with a gift to the Colson Center this month. Again, breakpoint.org/March 2021. Within about 24 hours, you will get a link to this conversation, to the video. And you can, just please don't post it on social media, but share it as widely as you want. Use it as a conversation with your kids. So one question I wish we'd have got to is a question about grandparents wanting to talk to grandkids. And that is one source of the huge generational divide. In fact, I am speaking to a group of grandparents this fall at a conference called the Legacy Coalition. They work on some of those issues. It's a toughie. There were some remarkably good questions here, and we're grateful for them. We're going to take as many of them as we can, and take them to the Q&A podcast that we do every Tuesday and Wednesday, and we'll try our best to answer them. If we can't, then we'll just, call Katy up again. Carmen LaBerge, good to see you joining us today. Carmen, she wants to have you on her radio program, and you should go on the radio program, Katy. She does a great job with them. So many other great things here. Love having all of you with us. Stay tuned. We'll be doing plenty of these, as well as our short courses and so many other things that are going on. So we'll send you an email. You'll have all the details you need. Breakpoint.org/March 2021. Katy, great to see you. Great job, great answers, and great book. Thanks for writing it.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.